Let's start with this. I mean, I guess it's a sense of melancholy to one degree that you're leaving this behind. What a unique place it is.
It is. The history alone of what happened out at the site, even before it was the site. There's a cowboy that's buried out on the site, and he was in charge of the horses that were part of the LTR stagecoach line. And so they came in one day, the stagecoach came in to change out horses, couldn't find him, and found him out in one of the corrals, and apparently he had been kicked in the head by one of the horses. So that sort of thing, the artifacts from the Native Americans that are out there and the rich history of them and what they did on those lands.
Things that the public will likely never
Right,
see.
yeah. And if you think about it, the atmospheric testing and all of that period of time, and the miners and ranchers that were out there that got dislocated from being out there, doing those activities, then to the underground testing, then to where we are today, supporting the national security. It's amazing the amount of things I've been able to see in my career out there.
You were a news guy for how long?
Here in Las Vegas for about 4 years.
But you liked his historical type stories, and did you ever foresee that that's where you'd end up?
I didn't. It was a weird sense of events that took place. I was covering the site as part of my beats, got a call from them that they needed somebody that had broadcast experience. I took a $2,000 cut in pay, but I made it up getting health benefits because where I was working in the media, there was no health benefits, there was no retirement plan. I made it up being able to do that. And plus, I wanted to stay in Las Vegas, so that gave me the opportunity.
Well, I mean, to become sort of the spokesperson for that site, that's effectively what you were.
Right. I joined a crew of about 8 or 10 people at the time, and now it's come where I'm the only one left of the bunch, from an office of about 15 people in the public affairs office to just me.
Tell me about the decision to retire from it.
It's been 31 years. I'm ready to move on to the next piece of my life, do things. There's pieces of the history I'd like to write about, see if I can do something with that, work around the history of the site. Just, it still intrigues me, and research it.
You're going to miss having access.
Right, well, I'm hoping that maybe I can still, through my good graces of time there, that occasionally when they get it back open, if there's the opportunity, I can do that. But yeah, it's going to be hard not being able to make the 65-mile drive out there and be able to go and take people on tours, show them the things that interest me, and to share that history. It's going to be hard, yeah.
How many times do you think you've been out there with media crews or given tours?
Media, production companies, politicians, VIPs, it's probably been in the 400, 500 times in the 30 years. You know, you probably, when I figure it up, 8 or 10 times a year over 30 years, that's going to bring you to 300 probably, so it's probably been 400 times.
And the line is about the test site, there's never a bad day out there, right?
Right. Bad day. A bad day at the site beats a good day in town.
I always wondered if you got any grief from your former colleagues at that other station, because you were on our station a lot because of a friendship that we developed and the stories that you shared with us.
I didn't, but you know, you as well as you've gotten into that history of the site and wanting to learn what it is. The things that you and I have done, this is not my story, this is our story. Being able to walk where John F. Kennedy walked, to be able to go into an underground bunker that right above our head was where an atmospheric nuclear test had detonated, the FISU event. Being able to go out there and work with you as you interviewed the people from the Office of Secure Transportation, the people that carry the nuclear weapons across the United States, transport them across the United States. This is more than my story. This is you and I's story.
That story, Office of Secure Transportation, I never even knew that those guys existed. But I remember when Matt and I ran into them on that side of the road, you warned us that, wow, that could have ended up pretty badly.
I do remember that. and if I remember right, it seemed like you kind of like, oh yeah, right, sure. Then when we got out to the site and did the story, afterwards you came up to me and you went, I know what you mean now.
Yeah, those guys are really serious. That was,
yes.
I don't know that they've ever done a story.
They haven't. You were the first one that I know of that got that in-depth to be able to see what they were, what they did, how they did it, and to have the access to their equipment.
You know, I don't know if this work is still going on, but the recreation, the archaeology of the test site, there was studies going on for a long time looking for sites. One of them we found together, the site where the atomic cannon shot off.
Right. The Grable test, where they fired a cannon with a 280 millimeter shell. Yeah, going out to that site and walking there and seeing those cables still laying in the desert that were holding the cannon. I think you and I even walked out in front of where the cannon fired to the trenches where the troops were, imagining what it was like to have a atomic shell, a 280 millimeter shell fired over their head. Yeah, it's the history to be able to look at those places and imagine what was going on in those times in the 50s. It's just stunning.
I mean, how many millions of people around the world have seen that shot in all kinds of in movies and music videos of the atomic forest, those trees swaying in the blast. You've told me that story.
Yeah, right. So that was from the Grable test. They put mannequins beside the trees, behind the trees, near the trees, out away from the trees, to understand what sort of protection a forest would give a soldier. So I've never seen a forest that was perfectly lined up like that it was, nor have I ever seen a forest where they went up to Mount Charleston, cut the trees down, planted them in the ground with concrete. But they still did that, and they got the information they needed. But to know that we've been out there, standing on that ground, where the cannon was fired, where the trees were, seeing that we've been a part of that history.
And Doomtown.
Yeah, you go where the Apple II houses are, and look in those houses to see where the mannequins were. You can look at the pictures, and you're standing in the same room where the mannequins were. And a mile away at the Apple II site was where the atomic bomb went off that was there. Yeah, going down in the basement of the house and looking up at the second story where all of the things that you can see in those pictures, you're standing there where history took place.
A lot of secrets out there over the years, and even I think probably to today. I remember one of the programs that you allowed us to know about, it was after 9/11, and it was, you know, people were getting mailed envelopes with toxic materials, and there was a lab up at Area 12, right?
The Defense Threat Reduction Agency was trying to understand how do you do and detect the signals that are coming from the places that are making those, and do the detection of that. Yes, and so working with that customer that uses the site, we were able to go and learn more about what they were doing in that facility to help protect and make Americans safer.
The bunker busters.
We did a lot of work to support the military on that. One of the programs that we did was that the military was trying to understand how to get ammunition into a tunnel, into a cave, to be able to take it out. And they did that with some of the tunnels that we have. And so the F-16s coming out of Nellis with a newly developed piece of ordnance, firing it going into the tunnel, the precision of the military to be able to do that, but being able to support that fight on terror and support our military, being a part of that was great as well.
The U-1A, that elevator ride through 1,000 feet of solid rock and seeing that thing down at the bottom, it was like straight out of the X-Files.
Right, you got a pristine underground laboratory that was developed from a facility that was actually started in the 1960s, 300 feet, 500 feet, to set off a full-scale missile to go down, which they never did. And the tunnel sat dormant for years, and then they came in, they did an underground nuclear test in U1A, and then they built out the facility where we use it today for subcritical experiments. But knowing the type of science that we can do down there and the information that they can gather in a millionth of a second, it's just amazing the science that has been created and taken place out at the site.
I'm thinking back to the period before I was here, before you were here, of the test site is set up. They've got all these brilliant scientists there and showgirls and all that Las Vegas had to offer here, and the two would occasionally mix. What an interesting period of history that was. And then the atomic bombs going off and becoming tourist attractions.
When you watch and see that tourists would stop gambling to go on top of a casino to watch an atmospheric test to see the mushroom cloud grow out in the desert. it's pretty amazing to think. And they pushed it back then. That's one of the things that they pushed, that you could come to Vegas, you could gamble, you could see the showgirls, and you could witness a nuclear test taking place.
Talk about taking people to see the Sedan Crater for the first time when they get up to the edge and see just the enormity of the whole thing.
It is the funnest thing to watch people's face, because they've heard of Sedan. They may have seen that video where it's forming and the chunks of rock are flying off and the fire is shooting out the side of it. But to watch people when they walk up there and see the sheer magnitude and enormity of that crater and how it was formed from a 104 kiloton thermonuclear weapon, it leaves people in awe.
You know, there's a lot of downside to the atmospheric testing, of course, which is why it was stopped. But man, I sure would have liked to have seen one of those.
Yeah. Can you imagine the people sitting there at Frenchmans Flat on those benches, 9 miles away, being able to sit there, hear it, and see it, and even possibly feel some of the heat from that coming off of them? It just, yeah, to be that close to it.
The you mentioned about News Knob, which is the name of the place where the reporters just sit and watch the tests, right? What has media coverage been like since that era? The people that you've had to encounter, is it hostile? Is it goofy? Are there a lot of misconceptions about the site and the programs out there, and from people in my line of work?
So the main thing people want to do stories on is the testing and the radiation effects, the downwinders, those type of things. So I get journalists who think that they have to come out here and have anti-seize on, that every square inch of the site is contaminated, when in fact that we've only impacted about 10% of the site. The rest of the site is pristine. You get people coming out here who honestly, journalists coming out here who honestly believe that they're going to see five-legged rabbits and giant toads and things like that, and so there are those perceptions. I also get calls from media who want to come and do the story on the history of Mercury, the base camp, and want to see the churches and the schools and the grocery stores and talk to the people who grew up there. That never happened. There was never any schools or grocery stores. There was a building that was a church for people that wanted to have services on Sunday, but during the week it served another purpose. So, you know, people's perceptions of how it was in the 50s, and then finding out for some it's not as glamorous as they thought it was.
You know, that idea of five-legged rabbits, of course, there's a lot of movies that were inspired by the testing program, you know, 50 Feet Women and, you know,
Right.
You know, those theories. I've got some artwork of that stuff on my wall. What about public misunderstandings? Same kind of thing? They think it's all contaminated?
Yeah, it's all about the radiation. That radiation has caused every illness. And I understand when a person gets cancer, they need to understand where it came from. And so it's easy to point to the site, to say, my father worked there, my uncle worked there, they were part of the soldiers, and so everything has happened. And there's programs that have been there to compensate those people, but at the same time, the misperceptions about that cancers were the #1 cause out there. It's just not
You did
accurate.
have one guy who infiltrated the site years ago, who found a way to incredibly walk all the way across it from west to east to get to Papoose Lake. You remember that story?
I do. I've read some of his accounts, seen some of the things, and everything I've read tells me he was there. He did, in fact, do it, because his descriptions of some of the things that are listed in his walks are very accurate.
When you review his tale, I mean, I'm wondering if you can say whether or not there was a security review afterward. That how the hell did this happen?
Well, you got to remember, you're talking about a piece of real estate the size of Rhode Island. There's not a fence around the site. There's lots of access to come into the site. There's BLM land on one side where you can come in through the site. You can come in on the western side of the site and hike in over the mountains and across and go across large pieces of desert without ever coming in contact with the road or being able to avoid the roads. So yeah, you're talking about a really large piece of real estate that you're trying to secure. What we secure are the facilities that need to be secured.
So it could happen. That's something that could, yeah.
Yeah, and it did happen.
I remember one of the security stories we did was about some special guards that were the robotic guards that were out there. How'd that work out?
It didn't. There's been a lot of programs that they've tried. I'm trying to remember what the acronym stood for. It was MDARS, I think, but mobile detection and reconnaissance type vehicles.
Yeah.
But they just couldn't hold up in the desert environments. It was RVs on steroids, basically.
A lot of misunderstandings about Area 51 and the DOE's relationship, the test site relationship, because it's right there. It's right next to you. It's got a number like the areas of the test site or the NNSS site, but it's not.
Right. And going back to your misperceptions, everybody thinks we are Area 51 and Area 51 is part of us. And if you look at the really old maps, that area where Area 51 is, there's a piece that goes out there. But there was a land swap that took place between the Air Force and us, where we got up that beak of the site, that northwest portion of the site was turned over to us. We turned that piece over to the Air Force, but people still use those 1950s, 1960 maps to say, aha, I told you so, it's there. But yeah, that's a big perception. My favorite thing, I guess, was when the storming Area 51 is two young women come riding up in a cab from Las Vegas, 65 miles to the front gate, and they've got little alien antennas on. They get out of the car because they're on our property, they get searched and everything. And to be told that they are on the wrong side, that they should have gone through 93, not 95. And now they paid for a cab ride to the site. Now they get to pay for a cab ride from the site back to Las Vegas. Who knows if they ever went around, but watching these young people having to pay for a cab ride to the wrong place was just, at the moment, very funny.
So can you tell us now that you're leaving government service, how many times you've been out there? I'm guessing dozens to Area 51.
I've never been there.
Have you ever tried?
I've never been out there.
Given what you learn about programs that are out there, and I'm sure there are some now that are sensitive, you had to get a security clearance.
Right. It's the same as the military's top secret. We call it a Q clearance, so that's what I have.
So they had to look all through all the dirty stories in Darwin's background.
Yeah, it's a full investigation. They look at everything.
You're going to miss it.
I am. There's no doubt I'm going to miss it, but I'm going to try to keep my finger in it through trying to continue to do some research. I've got several subjects that really interest me that I want to continue to look at. The nice thing is that the historical records are out there online, and what isn't online, they're easily available through the nuclear testing archives that our office maintains. So there's plenty of resources for me to keep looking to dig into these historical areas that I have interest in and want to write about.
Did you, you've released a lot of stuff. Were you the inside guy who was pushing for the release of films?
That started well before me. We had a guy that was assistant manager for health and safety, and he realized that the records were in Los Alamos and Livermore and Sandia and here, that they weren't together, and trying to prove the downwind claims, if they were true or not, where the fallout went, was stored in different places. We were able to collect all that information into one resource, into one location, and then have that archive to be able to point people as they were trying to make their claims and prove that they were affected by fallout. They could come and get the source to where the fallout actually did happen from those atmospheric tests.
You know, of course, the site, the employment at the site is not what it used to be at the height of the testing program, but it's still significant. And there has been so much discussion over the decades about what the test site could become, what it could be used for. Can you just talk about that in general and include what it is now? I mean, I imagine there are pockets of really interesting things that are going on now. And
what we are now is about our national security. Our main mission for the NNSA is to assure the safety, reliability of the nuclear weapons without doing underground nuclear weapons testing. And there are other government agencies who can come in and use our site as long as what they're doing fits into our national security mission. So we have those out there to be able to do those type of activities. We've supported private industry with the testing of chemicals. We've supported the chemical companies in the United States, the ones that make soaps and things like that, their base product is very hazardous. And where they do this, they can't spill it out into the open environment to understand how to mitigate it. We had those resources where they could come out, spill large quantity of chemicals into the open environment and learn how to mitigate them, to clean it up and to make it safer. What we know in the United States about the cleaning up of chlorine, for example, and preventing, or not preventing, but stopping chlorine spills from affecting cities and counties was learned basically out at the site. Fire departments across the United States are smarter today because of what we did out at the site to help the chemical companies.
Are there programs, I remember there's some anti-terror related activities that we had reported on before. Are there programs that you don't know about until afterward?
Of course, there's going to be those type of things.
Yeah. The battleship, the cruiser, that ship. You can't believe how many views the gun turret that's out there?
Yes, yeah, the gun turret. Yes.
Oh my gosh, how many people have seen that story?
USS St. Louis.
Yeah, what was it, Matt? Is that St. Louis?
No, I don't think it was St.
Louisville.
Louisville.
Yeah, the USS Louisville. And taking the turret and then putting basically a fake barrel on it, but it was it was a device to collect data from 3 or 4 atmospheric tests that took place out there. Instead of running cable out there, they just used this highly sensitive piece of equipment mounted to this gun turret. And the reason they used a gun turret is that they could spin it to look at wherever the atmospheric nuclear test was taking place, raise it, lower it, and get the data that they needed to gather.
They're smart guys. There's some brilliant people have worked out there.
Right, using simple, basic logic to solve very complex problems.
I mean, some real big brain people, some of the brightest minds in the world have been there.
It's more than that. It's the miners out there have been just as big a part of it. I have seen hundreds of stories of where the brains, the 1,000-pound brains, I've seen a lot of stories of where the 100-pound brains can't figure out something, and a miner or a laborer or craft person will go, well, did you ever think about doing this? A real basic, simple solution that the scientists are overthinking. And so they learn early on, bring the miners, the craftspeople that are going to be there into it, because they can help solve the problems as well. That's the one thing about this site. It has been a collaborative effort among everybody, from the brightest to the people that are working at the ground level.
Those tunnels, so you've taken us on the railroad that goes in, I don't know if it's hundreds of miles or if you even know how much it is, but just to think of digging out those tunnels, explosives 1 foot at a time, it's incredible.
We were at one time the knowledge source of how to drill big holes in the country. We could drill a hole 12 feet in diameter, thousands of feet in depth, with no more than 1 inch to 2 inches, maybe 4 inches of deviation from the top to the bottom. The engineering to do that with a 12-foot drill bit, I mean, we're sitting in an area here that is probably 12 foot in diameter if you think about it, and they were drilling holes that big that were straight and plumb, fully aligned.
Yucca Mountain gets dropped on a test site on the site's plate. National policy and acts of Congress, that was a pretty tense time for you, dealing with those issues politically in Nevada.
It has been, and good for me is that was a separate office and a separate public affairs group, and so I got to miss a lot of that fun and excitement.
So there is discussion about a new level of nuclear weapons, a new generation of weapons. That discussion pops up from time to time. It popped up again during the Trump years. The folks out there, you have a duty to be ready to go if the decision is made to start a testing program again.
There is a presidential decision directive that says that we have to be able to resume underground testing within 6 to 12 months. How feasible that is would be,
Everybody's gone.
Yeah.
They're all gone.
We've gone from analog to digital. We have a crane on the site that is still an analog crane. The crafts workers that come out of the union halls out to the site to work have been trained on digital cranes. So kind of like a fly-by-wire on an F-16, it's the same thing with the crane, but with an analog, it's pulling the stick back, doing that sort of thing. So they have to get completely retrained on how to work with this nuclear certified crane that is still an analog crane, and one of the few, if any, left in the United States.
Yeah, that would be quite a challenge to gear that back up if it ever happens. But if it happens, that's where it would happen.
Right, and it's the equipment, it's the cable, it's the people that had the experience of doing it. It's being able to recreate all of those things in that short time frame. Could it be done? Seeing what I've seen of the people out at the site and their ability to solve really complex problems, yes, but 6 to 12 months is going to be tight, in Darwin Morgan's opinion.